So now we're going to practice painting some leaves and some trees. And these are really fun to do. It's fun to do things that might seem kind of complicated, but they're really easy, and I think you're going to enjoy this lesson. So let's get started. Grab your round brush. This is my number 10 Princeton Heritage Series brush. I use it for just about everything. So grab your round brush and a piece of paper. I'm just using a quarter of a piece, and let's get started painting leaves and trees. So back when we first started practicing with using our brush, we did some strokes that looked a little bit like leaves. I'm gonna get some paint, water and paint on my brush. I'll show you what I'm doing here, sorry. Getting some water on my brush and some paint. You don't have to use green, you can use any color you want. Does not matter. So I'm going to practice a little leaf shape, and that's with a very light amount of pressure of my brush on the paper, and then moving to a heavier pressure, and then lifting that pressure up, and then get a little leaf shape. Let's do that again. Well, I'm going to get a little more paint on my brush, more water too. Light pressure, heavier pressure, lifting it back up. Okay. All right. So we practiced those at the beginning. Hopefully you took some time to do that. And if not, you could stop and practice that right now. And now I'm going to put these on a little branch. So let's make a little branch here. Make that any color. Doesn't have to be the same as your leaves. And I'll make a leaf at the top, pressing down, releasing that pressure. And let's make some more. Light pressure, more pressure, and then lightening it up. So you can see how they're a little bit different shape, but I like that. I think that looks natural. If you practice this a lot, I bet you can get them to be all the same shape if you want that. And that would be great. I like the variety in the shapes of the leaves. So I can change the direction of them. Change how dark they are, how light they are. Okay, so that is one way. Here, there should be one here, but our leaves here are in the way. Anyway, that should be, that is one example of some leaves that you could practice painting. Okay, let's grab another color. I'm gonna grab a blue this time. So I'm gonna grab actually Payne's gray, nice, really dark blue that looks like black. Yeah, got a little puddle of it here in my well. Okay, all right, I'm gonna grab that, and let's practice a different type of leaf. So this time, instead of the light pressure, full pressure, and then light, we're gonna go full pressure the whole way. So I'm going to press down. Oh, this works best with a lot of water on your brush. So let's try that again. I'm going to press down and turn my brush all the way around. I'm going to grab some more water, more pigment on my brush. Let's do that again. Pressing down, So the key to this one, as I'm remembering that, now that I'm practicing it again, is a lot of water. Might look like a strange type of leaf, but there are plants that have leaves like this. So let's make it look a little bit more like a plant. Connect them all. Okay. There's a little bit of variety in how dark they are. You know, I could fill it in if I wanted to. I think it looks better when it's natural, but I could do that. All right, so we've got the leaves where we press down, really light, heavy, light. This is kind of a heavy the whole time. Let's do one more. I just really want to practice this one some more. Pushing way down. Wow. Still wouldn't do it for me. There we go. Lots of water, lots of pigment on your brush. That's a key there. I'm gonna get lots of water, lots of pigment on my brush and do one last one. All right. Cleaning my brush off. Let's do another kind of leaf painting. We might go ahead and draw a leaf. All right, so looking at this oak leaf, I'm gonna make it a little bit smaller. And a little bit simpler, just for demonstration purposes. But it does always help to look at a real object you're trying to draw. Okay, so there's my little leaf there. Okay, see that? Okay, and so you could just freehand, you know, do these really loose leaves like that. Depends on what you're painting. Depends on what you want to accomplish. So here I'm going to grab some yellow ochre, and I am going to, you know, add some more water to that. Just grabbing water from my jar and putting that on here just so I can spread my yellow ochre around. Yellow ochre is a really great staple to have on your palette. It is a nice earthy color, and it's really beautiful. Okay, so I'm gonna add a little more yellow ochre there, and all right, fill in this whole space. So like I said, you can just do the loose ones, or you can draw out a leaf. If you don't feel comfortable just looking at the picture and drawing it, you could print out a picture of a leaf and trace it. You could use the method we did for the flowers by using tracing paper and then putting that on your watercolor paper and transferring it that way. All right, I have this wet yellow ochre on there. I'm going to grab some magenta, and I'm going to put that on top. Now I know that the picture we were looking at, it wasn't magenta, but when I think of oak leaves, I think of this pin oak my mom and dad had in their backyard, and the leaves were really purpley, and it was beautiful. So that's why I always use this color when I do oak leaves. I know, it's crazy. Okay, so I'm just gonna loosely fill those in. I don't want to completely cover up my yellow Just adding a little bit of water to my brush right now, letting those colors blend a little bit. But I like those, how they're working out so far. I have the wet paper, the paint on the paper, and the colors mixing in there, and I grabbed my salt shaker from the kitchen. And now I'm going to sprinkle this salt right onto the paint, and then I'm going to let it dry, and it makes a really interesting texture on the paper, and it does a little chemical magic with the colors as well. So let's do that. So I'm just going to sprinkle some right here. Just going to sprinkle that right on there and hope it does its magic. We'll let that dry. We'll come back to it and finish off that leaf. Okay. Let me just get some of the excess salt off my paper. Okay. So we have a couple fun loose leaves, stems of them. This drawn out one. Let's do another leaf. Well, not another leaf, but I'm going to do a branch of a tree. And the reason it's not really called a leaf is because they're needles. We're going to do like a pine needles. So I'm going to grab that yellow ochre again, and I am going to make a really thin, so light touch, just like I did with the other branches, light touch with my brush. Now I didn't have to use yellow ochre. I could have used like a sienna, not sienna, sepia, sorry. Or sienna would work too. Actually, so here's a little sepia I'm putting in there. If you want to, you could do that. And now I'm gonna I'm gonna use the greens, my green department for this. So I'm gonna use my Sap Green, I'm gonna use Hooker's Green. I might even use olive green. If you don't have those, if you just have one green, but you have blue, you could mix your green with blues and varying amounts of the blues to get different greens. So I am going to actually switch to, I could use that same brush, and I'm happy to, but I just want to practice a little bit with my smaller brush. So this one is it is a number 2. It's by Creative Market, so it's a really inexpensive brush, but it still comes to a fine point. It's been useful for me, so that's what I'm going to use right now. I'm going to give it a try at least. I might go back to my bigger brush because it's such a good brush. But let's give it a try on this little one. So I have a lot of paint on my brush, and I'm going to make some strokes coming out from the stem. And I'm going to make them in different directions, and I want to make them different lengths, and maybe even different variations of how much paint is on the brush, how dark it is or how light it is. See, even though some of those are a little bit different in quote color, they're all sap green, they're just different values. Remember that value scale. Just how much water is diluting the color matters. So just making my brush strokes out from the stem outward, because typically when you make a stroke, you're gonna, whether you know it or not, put a little more pressure on it initially and can lighten that up as you go out. So it's nice to have that thinner stroke at the end. That will make it look more realistic. So some are going this way, some are going that way. All right. That one was a little bit thick, but that's okay. Maybe it represents more than one stroke. All right. I'm gonna clean that color off. I don't even have to clean it off. I could just add my darker green on top of that. I'm going into the Hooker's Green, and I'm going to make some strokes that are adjacent to, overlapping. The Sap Green with this Hooker's Green. know my hand gets in the way sometimes when I'm painting on this. Sorry about that. You need to have enough water on your brush to make it, you know, flow out. So I'm going back into my paint often because it's such a small brush, it's not holding a lot of paint. So that's a disadvantage to this. Okay, all right, and I think I'm gonna grab some olive green now, just for one more layer of color. And you could do it all, like I said, you could do it all in one color. This is the olive green. You could take one of your greens, or whatever green you have, and add your blue to it, you know, make a mixture so that it's a different color altogether. You know, go back to your mixing chart and see what greens would work in this, okay? Any greens that you made up back then. Okay, so we have these 4 examples. Now I want to dry this. Use the blow dryer, and I'm going to dry this, and I want to show you how I would finish off this oak leaf. All right, so I dried this leaf, and now I'm going to just rub off the salt that is dried, and it's not going to work great if you don't let it dry. So be sure you take the time to walk away from your painting or get a hairdryer out and dry it. Because if you do this when it's wet, you're going to spread paint around. See, I'm being pretty rough with it. It's really getting those crystals of salt off there. Okay. All right, so I don't know if you can see that. Hopefully you can. The salt has left some marks where salt was. It absorbs some of the color and makes some different shapes. I really love the salt effect, and so that's why I think it's fun to do something like this. Now, if I wanted to, I could grab my brush. You just leave it just like that. It'd be great, and I would maybe erase some of the pencil lines around that maybe I didn't draw exactly in the lines. Just erase them now. Okay. Do that. I'm going back and grabbing the smaller brush, and I'm going to go back to the, that purpley color. It's a magenta. And I'm going to draw some veins with this. So small brush with a really light touch. Especially when you're doing veins, you want to do this as lightly as you can so that it doesn't look elementary-ish. Looks more realistic. Just a really light touch on these. That is the key. Okay, go to all the little branches here. All right, something like that is what you could do. Those are just some examples of painting different types of leaves. When I paint a leaf for a flower, I typically try to think about, so let's say we're doing a leaf for a rose. I try to make sure I look at the shape of it and try to incorporate
that into my drawing. I know that sounds, duh, of course you would, but I know that leaves on rose bushes are a little jagged like this. So I would do that. I know that there's a bigger version of that. That might be a hydrangea. Rounded leaves might be for hollyhock. So think about when you are drawing something that you're actually really looking at the plant object and making sure you're really carefully trying to replicate the actual thing. So here I'm going to do a little action with this leaf for a rose, and I'd like to think about what it looks like when it is being formed, you know, how it grows. And I typically we'll see a lot of yellows in new leaves before they've really branched out and gotten the effects of the sun and chlorophyll and all that. Maybe even a little bit of red in some of the leaves. That's something I definitely see with rose bush leaves. So leaves on the rose will have a red base to them. So here I have yellow and red. And then maybe I'd let that dry, but we'll go ahead and, just for brevity's sake, we'll go ahead and add some of our color to it, our green. So nothing really earth-shattering in this part of it. Just wanted to remind you that it's important to think about the shape of the leaf for what you're painting. You know, if it is a rose you're painting, make sure the leaves that you add to it, you're not just saying, oh, I'll just make a something like this for my rose, which similar, but just add a little bit of an edge to them. You know, just add that serrated edge. Doesn't have to be really pronounced. I'm trying to make mine less pronounced here. Just doing a little details will help the viewer see what you've made be a little more realistic. And I'm going to add even a little bit of red to this. Just for some realism. Go back to this one here. So don't take any shortcuts with something that is really simple to make right. Okay, try to be realistic with your leaves as much as possible. Well, as much as you want to also. Okay, all right. Next, we're going to stop and we're going to paint trees. So this is the microscopic view of it, looking at the leaves. Now let's step back and take a bigger view and paint a couple different trees, and I think you're going to enjoy that as well. So, all right, new piece of paper. So let's begin with just a tree that you might see maybe, let's say, midsummer, okay? And it's a deciduous tree, meaning it's a tree that will lose its leaves in the fall. So, and I'm just going to be painting with my number 10 Princeton Heritage Series brush, and I've got some water on it, and I'm going to start with a little bit of my yellow. So the yellow I use is a Hansa yellow, and it's by Daniel Smith, and it's kind of yellowy green, but you could use any yellow. All right, and I'm going to think of my tree maybe being, you know, this big, and I'm going to start by just putting in some areas, just dabbing paper with my tip of my brush. And I noticed I didn't draw a trunk first. I have at least have an idea in my mind how big I want this to be. And I'm just putting in some, like a base layer. Sort of like the leaves when we did those up close, and I put the yellow or, you know, the yellow ochre down first. That's what we're doing here, okay? Just have that down. It's starting to be absorbed into the paper. It's starting to dry a little bit. It's not all gonna dry. But now I'm gonna grab my sap green, okay? So sap green is a very yellowy green. So it's gonna go really nicely next to this Hansa yellow. Okay, and I'm gonna put it sort of next to, a little bit on top of the color I just laid down. So just using the tip of my brush, and like I said, some of it is right on top of the previous color. It's more effective if I put it adjacent to it. I don't want to cover up that yellow completely. All right, I'm going to put a little more in the center here, my tree. And as I'm doing this, no matter what color I'm using, I'm thinking about the shape that this tree is going to take. So I might want to, you know, have some branches a little lower over here. Okay, I'm liking it so far. I can just still adjust as we go along. All right, so for my third color that I'm going to add to this, I'm going to take some of that sap green and put that here on my palette with some water. I'm just dipping my brush into my water, and that gets the extra sap green out of it and adds it to my palette. And then I'm going to grab some, I think I'm going to grab some cobalt. Add that to my green. So now I have a very pretty green. And the nice thing about it is that it's going to look very complementary to my sap green and my yellow, because it includes the sap green. Instead of introducing a third color really that is foreign, I'm introducing a very similar color. And I might want it a little bit darker. So I'm adding a little more blue to it. Okay. So here I'm just trying to have some more darks. Third, you know, layer of color in here. It's giving my tree a chance to, some of it to dry. You know, if I just filled it all in, it would not look realistic. It would just be a bubble of color, meaning if I did something like this, where I just filled it in, right? That wouldn't be very realistic. That's what our kids do when they're learning. And I'm trying to leave areas of light, just like you see in any tree, you know, growing naturally. One thing I do want to go back to is go back to some of my yellow, because maybe I'm having more sunlight hit some of the top branches. So I'm going to add some of that to the top. And maybe a little bit more darker stuff hitting the bottom, because there's more shadows. Okay, all right, so I've got all that in, and now, so I'm going to grab my number 2 little brush, my skinny little brush, my round brush, And I'm going to go into my sepia, which is a really dark brown, basically. Now, if you don't have this, you could make it. Remember, go back to your mixing charts. You could do a red, blue, and a yellow and vary and increase your color so you get a dark color. You could mix that really easily, okay? So I have a lot of pigment on my brush, and now I'm going to start forming my trunk. So I'm going to make that come down and grab some more paint. Trying to maybe look at some pictures and maybe look out the window, see some trees and see what they look like. Trying to get a realistic looking tree, okay? All right. And using a really, really fine touch with my brush, making some branches, and I want them to be visible here and there throughout the tree. I don't need them to be everywhere, you know. Some that don't have leaves on them. Okay, because that's how trees grow, right? A branch. Okay. All right, so there's our one little deciduous tree. Maybe some branches are up here and they haven't gotten any leaves on them yet. Something like that. All right, so that's one tree there. Of course, we could do that again and do it maybe in fall colors. That would be a really simple process, and I'll do it really quick and we'll speed it up and you can see it. All right, so that's our tree in summertime and the tree in the fall. Of course, we could do another one if you really wanted to with maybe some spring flowers, and we could do a bare one, but I think you get the idea. All right, so let's move on to a couple other type of trees that I'd like to show you that are really fun. Similar techniques, and I think that you will enjoy those. Just think about same type of technique, just a dabbing type of technique, but this time we're going to do a pine tree, and we're going to use my greens. So I'm going to just start with a really light touch, and thinking about, I know I literally can just look out the window to do this one. Don't need to have any reference photos. I'm surrounded by these really big tall trees, and there's a lot of light coming through all the branches, and they're toweringly tall trees. And I'm just going to put a layer of this first color down. So I'm not, it's not just dots. So some of the dots are a little bit smudged. I'm allowing some light to come in through here. I'm trying to alter the pattern a little bit as I go along. Don't want it to look too straight Christmas tree-ish. Asymmetry is great. Okay, if I do something like that, now I'm going to grab darker green. Grabbing just happens to be Hooker's green in this case. I did not take the Sap Green off my brush, so they're kind of mixed together. You can see how it's giving it a little bit of dimension. Really, it's the same principle as the other trees, but if you change the shape, all of a sudden you have a pine tree or a fir tree or whatever you want to call it. We'll call these, I guess, fir trees. Or cedars or hemlocks or whatever they are here. Still learning my trees here in Washington. Okay, so we have those two colors. I could continue to add more. Don't really need to, but you could. And I'm going to go back to that sepia. And so again, notice how I didn't draw a straight trunk first and then build on it from there. I wanted it to look a little more natural. Now I'm going to put some of the trunk in there because you do see that along the way. And sometimes you see some of the branching, right? And because my paint's wet, sometimes when I put that down, I just am dragging the green around, but I like that. And maybe some of the branches don't have needles on them yet, so put some of those down here. Then if you see what I did on some of these trees is sometimes I'll just ground it. So I'll just spread a little water at the bottom of the tree. Spread a little water. I have a little green on that brush. It actually works out in this case. And kind of grounds the tree. Okay. Makes it like it's not floating in the middle of your page. Okay. To do that. All right. So you could do it like that. Alternatively, if you wanted to make it a little more pine tree-ish, you could make your strokes just like you did that pine branch back here when we did this. We're going to do a smaller version of it. You do that here. This would take quite a while, but it's totally doable. So remember to make your strokes go in different directions. Otherwise it will look like you just have one branch sticking out. So you could do that. Speed this up a little bit for you. Okay, and finishing that tree the same way, just gonna ground that up here. Great. So a couple different ways to make trees. You might have these as your main subject. You might have them as the background, or just want to practice them. I think it's a good techniques to practice. Okay. All right.
Okay, so we've practiced some leaves and different shapes of them and how to do them really loose or drawn out, or thinking about the layers of how they grow and how you apply the colors based on that. And then we've put them together into a couple different tree shapes. Of course, there's many other trees we could do, but this is a good starting place of something you could practice. And next, let's put it together a little bit more. So let's practice some skies. Those are a little trickier, so I think it's appropriate that we've built up to this layer, that we practice some skies, and then we can maybe put some elements together. We can practice the sky, put some layers of washes that we did way at the beginning, some washes for some landscape, and then maybe add some trees to it. So, all right, so that will be our next lesson. I encourage you to practice all of these different strokes for leaves, and maybe even think of different ways that you can vary these, or look at different trees and how could you do those. And go ahead and ask me if you have any questions about how would you paint this type of tree. Send me a note and we'll do that.